I assume everyone knows what I'm talking about, what is now being called the 12-Day War or the war with Iran. We got to spend a lot of time in our safe room during those 12 days. We were there for all of this. And because of the war with Iran, and because everybody but LL stopped flying, the Hartman Institute had to cancel almost all of its programs. Indeed, it did cancel all of the programs, but then it sent out an email to the rabbis who they know are the most loyal of all of the programs and said, if we were to put something together once the war was over, if we were to put something together, it all happened in June, the program was supposed to be in July, who could still come? Well, the people who could still come were the people who weren't planning to come early for the program. Is that, in other words, their tickets hadn't been canceled yet. Okay, so they got back an answer that about 75, I think it was 78 or 76, I don't remember, people would be willing to come. So in what normally is a 11, 12-day program, they condensed it into 8 days. And that's fortunate because I rely on them every summer to produce all the materials that I'm going to use when I get back here, assuming the Temple Israel wants me to continue to teach.
Oh, we want you definitely.
We'll see. I don't take anything for granted. Anyhow, so these materials were put together by Rabbi Dr. Daniel Hartman, and his name is spelled Daniel, but he pronounces it Daniel, because his father called him Daniel, and so that's what he calls himself. And so I'm relying on that. Next week, I'm going to be relying on a different Hartman scholar in terms of the materials that she put together. And each of the 4 sessions, different people put the materials together. And they put these materials together specifically for the rabbis who come to use. So there's nothing shady about this at all. They want us to do this. Okay, so we're going to start sort of easy. There's some people who came in who do not have a text. Is there somebody you could share who could give this extra one?
Tim's making more.
So just as the theme on this is really just peace, from war to peace. Of course, you can imagine what all the scholars were thinking about. If you live in Israel, as we do most of the year, there isn't anybody in Israel that has not been thinking in one way or the other about the issue of war and peace. It's a very small country. Even for us, I say this often, I think I said this at the Brotherhood Brunch, even for us who are immigrants, who do not have children in the army, who do not have the broad kind of extended family that most Israelis live within. We know people within 1 degree of separation that were significantly touched by the war. A friend of ours, she's originally American. She has 4 children. She's a past president of our congregation. She currently works for the Reform Movement, so you may encounter her. She deals with overseas relationships. Her name is Anna Avital, if you encounter that name. She has 4 children. They're all combat soldiers. Her daughter, 5 months pregnant, was called up October 8th. Now, obviously, she was not in combat, but she was called up through the birth of that child. Her youngest son was in an armored personnel carrier that was hit by an RPG. The person a couple seats away from him was killed. He was burned on the right side of his body. He fully recovered. But that's just us. These are somebody that we know, a personal friend.
This kid has had dinner at our house.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
A young lady who I mentioned this also at the Brotherhood Brunch. Her role in the army was tatzpanit, which means she was one of the lookouts you may have read about. It took me forever to be able to say
Do
that.
they not have a Sullivan's rule in Israel?
I would have to know what a Sullivan's rule
Well, that is
in World War II, you couldn't have another son go in the war.
No,
No,
Because.
no, it's possible that if you're an only surviving son, then arrangements will be made, but it's not an absolute rule. There's no saving Private Ryan. The, what, in her case, we don't know her, but she lived in the building next to us. And her position was overrun on October 7th and she did not survive.
Yeah.
To say that she didn't survive, they weren't even able to bury remains for her for several months because it took that long to identify any remains. So, as I said, and that's the building, one building over from us. The park between our two buildings is now named for her. Her name is Yam Glass. Glass, as they would say. So nobody in Israel does not have the issues of war and peace. Now, sadly, from our perspective, I think I'm speaking for both of us, we were not there a few days ago when
oh no, we would have been, we
when
would have been.
the final living hostages were released. After everything that everybody's been through, you can just imagine the word release is intentional. I'm using it intentionally on my part because it doesn't just mean that they were let go. There was a national release in terms of what had been pent up. And it's not over by a long shot, but I believe that that's why Daniel picked this subject. It may sound sort of mundane, you know, a group of rabbis who know rabbinic texts, why would you be talking about peace? We sort of know a lot of these texts, and I'm going to start with ones that I think we all know. So I entitled one set of classes that we did a couple years ago, my famous Midrashim. How do I know that these are famous texts? What's my definition? If I know them, then they must be famous. Okay, so we'll start with the famous text. Everybody should have, you know, the front page there. Altogether, it's 12 pages. But actually, I want to start with text number 2. Text number 1, we don't use it that. So text number 2 comes from sort of the big book of Midrash on the book of Leviticus. That's what Vayikra Rabbah, Leviticus Rabbah means. If you're not sure of the translation, you don't trust it, you can check the Hebrew. Joel will be doing it for you. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is one of the famous sages, he's the guy who went into a cave. He is considered, tradition considers him the guy who wrote the Zohar, who is the father of Jewish mysticism. He didn't write the Zohar. Jewish mysticism is something much bigger than just him, but this is the way the tradition thinks of him. He says what? Great is peace, as all blessings are included in it. And then he quotes the verse that we quote all the time in Jewish circles, right? Adonai Ozla Amo Yitein, Adonai Yivarech et Amo Bashalom. God will give strength to God's people. God will bless God's people with peace. And then Hizkiah, another rabbi, says, peace is great as in regard of all mitzvot. In other words, it's the equivalent of all the mitzvot. Peace. And then he gives a proof text, right? Seek peace and pursue it. We know this from Psalms. It's all through the Hebrew Bible, all through the text. These are all familiar to everybody, right? We're more or less, even if you don't remember exact place and location, you know the basic idea. Numbers. God spoke to Moses. Speak to Aaron and his sons. And what is Moses supposed to say to Aaron and his sons? This is how you bless the people, right? How do you bless the people? Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. How many times have you heard this? May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'kuneka. May God's face, may God's light shine upon you, and may God be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha. May God's face be lifted up to you. And how does it end? V'yasem lecha shalom. And give you peace. So every time you hear a priestly blessing, every kind of synagogue, Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, renewal, I don't care what it is, they use this. We always are quoting peace over and over again. And just one last one. A friend of ours wrote this song. Danny Freelander wrote it with Jeff Klepper. The name of the group is called Kol Beseder. And they wrote a music to a prayer in the Friday night prayer book. in the Amidah called Shalom Rav. Shalom Rav Yisrael. Okay, well, what does that song say? Shalom Rav. What is shalom? Peace. Rav. Great, right. Great peace. Lasting peace. Because we pray for peace 3 times a day. Shalom Rav in the evening. Sim Shalom in the morning. Right? Which means grant us peace. Right? You remember how the old, well, enough people here are old enough to remember this. You remember the Union prayer book that said, grant us peace, thy most precious gift, O eternal source of peace. And it did say that.
I have the handouts to contain double sided.
Really?
I see some double sided and I've got.
Okay, well, that must
So
be.
I can go make more copies if somebody gives me a double sided version. Yeah, I already told yours, yours wasn't. That's how I figured it out.
See, here's the single. Here's the single. Make it double, please. Thank you. No, none of the, no, she'll make the double. Okay, I'll read everything. So I just know that students, even adult students, particularly Jews, like to have something in their hands. So I copied them for everybody to look at, but okay, now we'll get to the interesting material. What does peace really mean? It's fine to say, peace. Some of us remember this. I mean, as we used to say, I cut my eye teeth on this. I'm 75, which means, and I don't intend to go into the politics of this, but it means that when I was young, we were demonstrating then too.
Yeah.
And we had peace signs, which if you got right was the semaphore for peace. If you got wrong, it was the Mercedes-Benz. If you just drew a thing like this in a circle, that was advertising for Mercedes-Benz. It had to go all the way down to bisect the circle with the other part. Some of you remember this at Hillel at the University of Missouri, that hotbed of rebellion and protest that we went to school. Hillel produced little buttons, which I still have, frankly. There's a little button that had the peace sign in it, said shalom on it, and around it, it said lo yisa goy el goy cherev. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Okay, so we've all been cheering for peace. John Lennon and the Beatles wanted to give peace a chance. Some of you will remember this. Tom Paxton wrote a song along those lines as well. It's well known. I don't know that we really know what we mean when we say the word. Because the word peace has a lot of different meanings. We're going to look at 3. The first one is not very pleasant. So I will warn you about that. Most people are not very familiar with the book of Deuteronomy. Most liberal Jews, but I think most Jews were very familiar with the book of Genesis because we all grew up, if nothing else, on little children's books, sort of golden age, golden books that about, the Garden of Eden, Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel. We all remember this from religious school. You get this in preschool, although you could ask Tino if that's the case still, and we all the way through kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade. Exodus, we all know Exodus, right? At least we know the version of Exodus as the story is told in the Passover Seder, which is kind of a final redaction. It's very different than actually what's in Exodus, but we know it. Leviticus less so. Leviticus has got a lot of rules and regulations. Numbers has great stories in it, which sadly we should know, but we don't know because it usually comes in the summer and religious school's over. God's on vacation. And Deuteronomy, all the more so. Most people really don't. We know it's a second telling. That's what the word Deuteronomy means. But we don't really know it.
Pages.
Okay. Who needs copies there?
We need 2 down here.
Thank you.
It's like, it's like,
No, that's all, 15 should be enough, because I had made 15 myself. This is why I don't, this is why I do. You know, when you ask- oh, it's the one.
Yeah.
Okay. Ladies and
Do
gentlemen.
we have a couple more of these?
Okay, we once had a guide we were very fond with, that we had a really good experience with. His name was Moshe Huster.
Is there one more?
Yeah. And Moshe, he had a pretty thick Israeli accent that he used to begin every sentence with, "Ladies and gentlemen." So, I say that still. But let's look at Deuteronomy 20. When you approach a town, the Israelites, Moses is giving them instructions, right? They're going to go into the promised land, to the land of Canaan, Eretz Israel. When you approach a town to attack it, nobody was handing anything over to the Israelites. They had to take it by force. We don't like to say this often. You shall offer it terms of peace. That sounds good. What kind of term? If it responds peaceably and lets you in, all the people present there shall serve you at forced labor. So if they let you in, they become slaves. If it does not surrender to you, that was the good alternative, but would join you in battle, you shall lay siege to it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, you shall put all the males to the sword. You may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town, all its spoil, and enjoy the use of the spoil of your enemy, which the Lord your God gives you. This is Torah. Thus you shall deal with all the towns that lie very far from you. Towns that do not belong to God is giving you as a heritage. You shall not let a soul remain alive. No, you must proscribe them. Who are we talking about? The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. These are the people of Canaan, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Lest they lead you into doing all the abhorrent things that they have done for their gods, and you stand guilty before the Lord your God, they'll be a bad influence. Get rid of them. That's Deuteronomy. Who's read this before? I know Rita. Because she used to come in the summer.
Is this what, some of the, very Orthodox use as their, premise to go into the West Bank and take over?
Okay, so did everybody hear her question? She said, is this what the Orthodox use? I'm gonna object to your term Orthodox.
Okay,
They are Orthodox, you're talking about, but they're a specific kind. And I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. So one of the people I was studying with this morning, I study on Tuesday mornings with a group of rabbis that we've been studying together since we lived in Chicago. So that's we left there almost 23 years ago. So that'll give you an idea how long this has been going on. But one of them is an Orthodox rabbi who would not fall into that category in the least. So we have to be a little careful. The so-called religious Zionists who live in the West Bank, yeah, they sort of look at they use these kind of texts. Now, what I want you to understand is that this is a kind of peace. We call this kind of peace Pax Romana. Roman peace. How the Romans were all about peace. Just ask any of the Caesars. They'll tell you they were about peace. They were about peace. Pax, right? Pax is not P-O-C-K. P-A-X. Pax is peace. Their kind of peace was to pacify everyone to their will. right? Isn't that the word we use? Pacify? Where does that come from? Same word. Why is the Pacific Ocean considered the Pacific Ocean? Because there aren't supposed to be many storms out of the Pacific Ocean. But that's why it's called that. Whether it's true or not is another matter, but that's why it's called that. So peace, in this case, means pacification. And in this case, that means military pacification to the point of either enslaving the conquered people or killing them. Yes,
What's the difference between that and what the Nazis did? Or what currently is happening with Ukraine?
would you like my honest opinion or something nice? My honest opinion is the Nazis lost. That's the difference. If they had won, how do you think they would have described themselves? As monsters?
No.
Rome won until it didn't. Rome won, and so it called themselves pacifiers. They quieted. What is when we put the thing in a baby's mouth? What is it supposed to do? Quiet them. Control this. Take control of it. And so there is a notion of peace, even deeply embedded in our tradition, not the part of our tradition that we rely on. I think I can say that universally, as everybody in this room, but it is still there in the tradition. And we sometimes wonder where people within the Jewish fold, what are their sources? What are they drawing on for their form of thinking? What is Itamar Ben-Gvir drawing on? You know who Itamar Ben-Gvir is? Itamar Ben-Gvir is the head of what's called the Jewish Power Party in Israel. He is opposed to the current agreement with Hamas in Gaza because he wants to empty Gaza of its inhabitants and resettle it as part of Israel. Now, I don't know that he relies on this text, but if he doesn't, he could. Let's look at Joshua. For sure, we almost never read Joshua. It's maybe the first chapter is a Haftarah, if you read it. But I think it's interesting. It's worth noting. We just had Simchat Torah. It's worth noting that every time the story reaches its climax, Moses died. The Israelites are ready to go into the land of Israel. Do we go in? No, we start over. And we start over immediately. No passing go or collecting $200. We start over immediately, back at the very beginning, before there are any groups. I don't think that's an accident, right? We talk about the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. If you want to think about it, the scholars, they don't do this anymore. But once upon a time, back in the dark ages when I was in high school, you could read about scholars talking about a hexateuch, the 6 books, because the natural conclusion is Joshua when they go into the land. Right? The whole story is leading up to going into the land. Joshua, they go into the land. So why isn't it a 6-book cycle instead of a 5-book cycle? I don't think it's an accident. I think that this was intentional, that we don't read about the conclusion. It's the journey that matters, not the end. We're going to talk much more about this in a couple of weeks, but it's the journey that matters. And when we stand in a circle out there and with the Torah open and a couple of Israel's rabbis immediately finish Deuteronomy and are into Genesis again, it's because the journey matters. We have to start the cycle all over again. We never get to the end. Okay, well, let's look at Joshua.
Tell me if this is right or wrong,
Of course I will.
but I was under the understanding from some learned people that we start over right away. When we didn't used to do that a long time ago, but they would say that the Jews have finished their book, they're done. And so we decided to start right over.
That's a perfectly good explanation. You see, once upon a time, there wasn't a set of readings. It wasn't like we will read the entire Torah every year. That comes relatively late. Different Jewish communities read the Torah at a different pace. And so the whole notion of Simchat Torah developed, the way we think of it today, developed relatively late, but I think it was on purpose, the way it was developed. I want to give more credit than just, we have to defeat what the non-Jews are saying about us. That is a perfectly good explanation for everything we Jews do. Why do we do this? Because the non-Jews were saying this, and so we had to show. Why are we doing this? Because you can use that for everything. I prefer to try to find a more positive kind of explanation. And in this case, I think that there's a lesson which is implicitly being taught, that the journey is what matters.
Also, there's something very metaphorical about it in a way, like the journey never ends.
I didn't hear the last thing you said.
The journey never ends.
Right, that the journey never ends. That's exactly right. Okay, Joshua. When King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem learned that Joshua had captured Ai, that's a city in the book of Joshua, and proscribed it, which means he had put a ban on it. They were passionate, treating Ai and its king as he had treated Jericho and its king. Now we do know that one. Well, what happened to Jericho? Right? I learned it as Joshua drank a bottle of Jericho. Anyway, I told you I had a misspent youth. And its king, and that moreover, the inhabitants of Gibeon had come to terms with Israel and remained among them. But they replied to Joshua, you see, your servant has heard that the Lord your God had promised Moses, God's servant, to give you the whole land and to wipe out all the inhabitants of the land on your account. So we were in great fear for our lives on your account. That is why we did this thing. And now we are at your mercy. Do with us as you consider right and proper. And he did so. He saved them from being killed by the Israelites. That day, Joshua made them hewers of wood, drawers of water, and they still are, for the community and for God's altar in the place that God would choose. What did Joshua not do? He didn't kill them. What was he supposed to do? You read Deuteronomy, right? Okay, so what I want you to see here is that our great heroes don't always do what God tells them to do. They don't always do what God tells them to do. And I want you to think about that. Okay? So I keep, you're kicking me.
Oh, sorry.
You're sitting at that end next.
So does God have a response?
Well, so I want you to think about this, because all of us were challenged with this idea on Rosh Hashanah. In the traditional Jewish community, the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. We've always read it on Rosh Hashanah day itself. I think that the Reform movement chooses to read it because it is such a challenging story. As I said to the people in Beckley, where we conduct high holiday services, and it's actually we, because Simone is doing a lot of the singing now, is that there is no single entirely coherent interpretation of the binding of Isaac that I've ever read. Every interpretation, it is possible to find some verse in the story that seems to contradict that interpretation, because the story is so complex in such a few sentences. But the one thing that is clear is God tells Abraham to do an abhorrent thing, to kill his son. And to emphasize it, God says, not just your son, et bincha, et yechidecha, your only son, the one you love, Remember, so the tradition interprets this as not Ishmael. Okay, not Ishmael. The only son of his mother, the one you love, the only son that you really care about, the one who is your future, Isaac. And Abraham says, sure. Where and when? How fast? I'm convinced Abraham was supposed to say no. And that I base that on these passages, and we'll see others over the course of the few times that we get together, where people object to what God tells them. And God is okay with it.
So what you're saying even ties into the Holocaust with the most fundamentalist Christians who support Israel, and they say there would not have been a Holocaust if God, because God was telling all Jews to go to the land of Israel, and they were not listening to God. And that is an excuse that they make, even though they support Israel.
So what I would like you to do is hold on to that.
Okay.
Specifically for next week. Specifically for next week, we're going to talk a lot about this kind of, what I think is underneath all of that kind of stuff next week. Okay. All right. So we see the distinction between Deuteronomy and Joshua, right? In the Jerusalem Talmud, you know, there are two Talmuds, right? There's the Babylonian Talmud, the big one. Okay. And they call it the Jerusalem Talmud. Raise your hand if you think it was written in Jerusalem. Okay. It was not written in Jerusalem. We just like to say that. It was probably finalized in Tiberias. So scholars often refer to it as the Palestinian Talmud because it was done in what the Romans called Palestine, as opposed to the Babylonians, which was done in Babylonia. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said, Joshua sent 3 orders to the land of Israel before they entered the land. Those who want to evacuate should evacuate. Those who want to make peace should make peace. Those who want to go to war should go to war. This is the message he sent to the inhabitants. The Gergesites evacuated, believed in the Holy One, praise be he, and went to Africa. I'm sure you didn't know that. Until I come and take you to a land like your land. And according to the Jerusalem Talmud, a land like your land is Africa. They obviously didn't know geography very well, but the people of Gibeon made peace. We sort of read about that above. That the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel. 31 kings went to war and fell. In other words, the people of Israel had to fight. Some they didn't have to fight with, but others they had to fight. Which means that Judaism, it's hard to make a case biblically that Judaism and pacifism go together. You can make that case post-Bible. There are plenty of texts, but it's hard to make that case from a biblical perspective. Okay. Questions about Pax Romana? Peace as pacification, as conquering, as taking over. Okay? All right. The part 2, I think, is more interesting and more important. But it only makes any sense if we've read part 1, which is peace with justice. It should be labeled page 5 in your.
It's labeled part 3.
Yeah, I could say part 3, but that's because I didn't include everything that we did at the Institute. Okay. So again, we're in Deuteronomy. It said Deuteronomy is a complex book. Then God said to me, you have been skirting this hill country long enough. Now turn north and charge the people as follows. You will be passing through the territory of your kin. Who's Israel's kin? The descendants of Esau, right? What is Esau's other name? Edom, right. which means red. If any of you have been to Israel and if you have stood on Masada and you looked across at the hills, the mountains over in Jordan, they are Hare Adom, the red mountains. That's the land of Esau. So coming up out of the Sinai, you're going to cross that land because that's how they came. They crossed and they came from up the east, north along the east side of the Jordan, and then across. Okay. Who live in Seir, another name for it. Though they will be afraid of you, be very careful not to provoke them. For I will not give you of their land so much as a foot can tread on. Why? I have given the hill country of Seir as a possession to Esau. Not for you. Not for you. Can't have it. No matter how much you want it. You can't have it. What food you eat, right? The tradition says there were 600,000 men. Right? They came out of Egypt. Now, granted, they've been in the desert for 40 years, and who knows what that led to. But if there were 600,000 men, that means 2 million people, right? Roughly speaking. So you're going to have to find food. What food you eat shall obtain from them for money. Even the water you drink, you shall procure from them for money. Indeed, the Lord your God has blessed you in all your undertakings, watching over your wanderings through the great wilderness. The Lord your God has been with you these past 40 years. You have lacked nothing. We then moved on away from our kin, the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir, away from the road of the Arava. Some of you have been in the Arava. That's what's between Masada, the end of the Dead Sea, and Elat. Away from Elat and Etzion Geber, and we marched on in the direction of the wilderness of Moab. And God said to me, do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession. I have assigned Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot, because Moab was considered to be his descendant. Right? These are all part of the extended family. So you don't go to your first cousin 3 times removed and take his house. It was formerly inhabited by the Emim, a people great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Anakites is probably the name of this people, but in Hebrew, an Anak is a giant. So to say that you were as tall as the giant people. Like the Anakites, they are counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim. Similarly, Seir was formerly inhabited by the Horites, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, wiping them out, settling in their place, just as Israel did in the land they were to possess, which God had given to them. Up now, cross the Wadi Zered. So we crossed the Wadi Zered. The time that we spent in travel from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed into the Wadi Zered was 38 years, until that whole generation of warriors had perished from the camp, as God had sworn concerning them. Remember the story of the spies. Indeed, God hand struck them to root them out from the camp until they were finished off. Now it gets interesting. But when all the warriors among the people had died off, God spoke to me saying, you are now passing through the territory of Moab, through Ar. You will then be close to the Ammonites. Do not harass them or start a fight with them, for I will not give any part of the land of the Amorites to you as a possession. I have assigned it as a possession to the descendants of Lot. It's repeating again. The text does that a lot. It too is counted as the Rephaim territory. It was formerly inhabited by the Rephaim, who the Ammonites called the Zamzumimim. A great people, great numerous, as big as the Anakites. God wiped them out, right? We heard all this. So too with and it goes on like this. Don't touch them. Okay. 24, we're all still together? Up, set out across the Wadi Arnon. See, I give you into your power Sihon, the Amorite. Have we heard anything about Amorites? Is it okay to touch them? King of Heshbon and his land. Begin the occupation. Engage him in battle. This day I begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under the heaven, so that they shall tremble and quake before you wherever they hear you mentioned. Then I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kademot to King Sichon of Heshbon with an offer of peace, as follows. Now, what did God just tell Moses to do? Invade them. And do what to them? Conquer them. And we read in Deuteronomy, the other passage. What do you do when you conquer them? Oh, you give them a chance for peace, which means you enslave them. If they refuse the peace, you kill them. Moses sends messengers. Did God tell Moses to send messengers? What's the message? Pay careful attention. Let me pass through your country. I will keep strictly to the highway, turning off neither to the right or left. What food I eat, you will supply for money. I'll pay. What water I drink, you will furnish for money. I'll pay. Just let me pass through. Which is what Moses was told to do with the kissing cousins. Does this strike anybody as a little odd? What did God tell him to do? These are not cousins. These are Amorites. The king of Heshbon. No Israelite connection. Don't go back to Lot, who is Abraham's nephew. It doesn't go back to Esau. None of that. These are the people who we're supposed to conquer. What does Moses do? He sends messages that says, just let us pass. We won't hurt you. We'll stay on the highway. No matter what you heard about us, whatever our reputation is, just leave us alone. Yes, we're going to have to eat. Yes, we're going to have to drink. It's a big deal. We'll pay. Don't take it as aggression. Does it work?
It's gonna be a wide highway for 6 million people.
2 million people. Let's not exaggerate. 600,000 men. 600,000 Jews is plenty. All right, now look at verse 29. As the descendants of Esau who dwell in Seir did for me, and the Moabites who dwell in Ar, that I may cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us. But King Sichon of Heshbon refused to let us pass through, because the Lord had stiffened his will and hardened his heart in order to deliver him into our power, as is now the case. And the Lord said to me, see, I began by placing Sichon and his land at your disposal. Begin the occupation, take possession. Sichon with all his men took to the field against us, and the Lord our God delivered him to us, and we defeated him and his sons and all his men. At that time, we captured all his towns. We doomed every town, men, women, and children, leaving no survivor. The end's not so great. We retained the booty, only the cattle and the spoil of the cities that we captured. What was not there? Who does God not get angry at? It's Moses. This is Deuteronomy. Wouldn't you have expected God to get angry at Moses? God gave Moses a direct order, perfectly clear, no room for interpretation, no games here. Moses doesn't follow it, not at all. He treats these strangers exactly the way he treated the cousins. Now, God isn't going to let that stand, as we see in the text. But God does not get angry at Moses. What would have happened if Abraham had said no? What if Abraham had behaved as Moses does here? I think God would have applauded. You finally get it, Abraham. Of course, this is absurd. Just think about Abraham himself. When God says to Abraham, I shouldn't hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, and I'm about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, does Abraham say, sure, where will be a good seat? That is not what Abraham says. Abraham does what? God, can the righteous judge of the whole earth not judge righteously? What if there are 50 people there who don't deserve to die? Abraham knows how to stand up to God. Just chooses not to when it comes to his own son. Makes it even worse, doesn't it? How many people do we know who know how to do the right thing in public and not the right thing at home? I don't think it's an accident. These texts, the reason that they're eternal, that we can read them year after year after year, is because we never exhaust the possible meanings in them. Abraham here is not the Abraham of Sodom and Gomorrah. Moses, here, is not the Abraham of the Akedah. He's the Abraham of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Except he doesn't argue with God. He doesn't reason with God. He just changes.
Actually, he just defies God.
Yeah, which is different because Abraham at Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, argued. But my point was that he stood up. But you're absolutely correct. But Abraham could have just not got up early the next morning and taken Isaac on the road.
Absolutely, I'm definitely a believer that he failed the test. But there's a difference between. I still would expect you to applaud Moses for trying to seek a peaceful solution. I really would like that ending much better. But at the same time, there's a difference between defying God totally, just ignoring God's instructions, and saying to God, I think maybe you better think this over a little bit.
Okay, I agree with you. And I will stand by my point, though. Sometimes it's appropriate to defy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Sometimes you simply have to say no. I think that's sort of a relevant issue today.
I do too.
And here it is. I didn't make this up. There it is in Deuteronomy. Guys need to pay attention in the summer. There's good stuff all year round if you look at it. I'm really serious about this. It's too bad. It's not like the great stories from Genesis or Exodus, but there's amazing stuff in Numbers and Deuteronomy if we just knew it. Okay, so we look at Numbers Rabbah. You notice here what I would argue Moses did here is pick the definition of peace, which is peace with justice, not pacification. He's ordered to do Pax Romana, and he offers a peaceful resolution. Just let us pass. Numbers Rabbah. Oh, we're only on page 7. Another matter. Israel's saying, this is one of the 3 matters, and that's not important because we're only going to look at number 3. When the Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, wage war with Sichon, even if he does not seek to wage war with you. You provoke war with him, as it is stated, rise and travel. That's what we read above, right? But Moses did not do so. Rather, what is written, I sent messengers. Now remember, this is a midrash. This is a commentary on what we read in the Bible, in the Torah. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, watch this move. As you live, I am voiding my words and fulfilling your words. I am voiding my words, God's words, and fulfilling your words, Moses. You are teaching me, Moses. As it is stated, when you approach a city to wage war against it, you shall call to it for peace. In other words, we read this passage. You shall call to it for peace, and it was Pax Romana. In the Midrash, God is saying, you taught me something, Moses. You're right. It should be peace with justice, not peace with pacification. And so that's what it means now, you shall call for peace when you come to a city. Exactly what you did when Sichon did not accept. And then wait, this is not exactly in the text that we read above. There's no hardening of any hearts. Sichon refuses. And then God says, okay, he refused. Now we have to topple. the Midrash is fascinating here. Imagine the Midrash saying, having God say to Moses, Moses, you taught me the correct definition of peace. Peace with justice. I think it's an amazing Midrash. But Nancy,
But God did harden.
that's in the text above.
Right. So how can we,
This is a Midrash.
but how can the Midrash interpret that
Just-
God was happy
just
about
ignores it.
God, okay.
It's a Midrash. That's the joy of Midrash.
Okay.
You get to decide which words of the text you're going to focus on. And so what it says, instead of focusing on hardening Pharaoh, hardening the king's heart, it's the same problem as hardening Pharaoh's heart. Instead, what it says is, oh, no, I get it now. God is saying, I get it now. Yes, you need to give them an opportunity for peace, but I meant conquering them. You meant some sort of just peace, and that's better. I like what you do better, Moses. So that's what the verse is going to mean from now on.
Okay.
It's so much better than thinking of God as this omnipotent, perfect, immutable kind of being that can't be dealt with. I can't relate to that kind of God, really, if you think about it. I mean, I can intellectually, I can, but in this case, there's a give and take. God is, of course, the senior partner, but God listens to the junior partner and sometimes adjusts to what the junior partner says. It's really a great management model.
And a very comforting.
Right? Is
thought.
that how the city works? Shelley?
Absolutely.
This is exactly what the mayor does. Right? But I guess I'm not a little bit clear on this story because when they approached Sihon, they weren't at war. Why would they call for peace when they weren't even at war yet?
Well, it's because, are you asking about the Midrash or are you asking about the text?
The whole thing just doesn't hang.
No, so the text itself, it's very clear. God wants them destroyed. The text is pretty simple in Deuteronomy. God wants them destroyed. Moses doesn't cooperate. So God hardens the king's heart so that they won't agree to Moses's request and they'll have to go to war and they'll all be destroyed. Okay, that's the text. The Midrash is never bound by the text. If the Midrash was bound by the text, it wouldn't be the Midrash, it would be the text. No, the whole point of the Midrash is to see what can be pulled out of the text. Now, it's a little bit fancy word of eisegesis, which has nothing to do with Jesus. Eisegesis is reading into the text as opposed to exegesis, which is reading out of the text, right? So clearly they're reading into the text, just like Nancy pointed out. They skipped sort of an important datum. Okay, but that's not what is important. What's important to the tradition is what they said here about peace, what they said here about God. This is what we should believe about peace. That peace comes with justice or it's not peace.
Well, I find it a very comforting thought that there is God who would listen to someone like Moses.
Yeah, because Moses is far from perfect, right? But in this case, in our kishkas, we know Moses is right, right? We know he's right. And so what's comforting, what is fantastic is, I guess, in God's kishkas, God knows he's right. Which I just think that's an amazing thing.
Well, Rabbi, isn't this being carried through now with Israel, letting people know that they were going to be bombing and to allow them time to get out before they started to?
Yes, that is what's underneath that. Since the Second World War, there are these rules of war, which we should all understand we're not really following the Second World War. There were the bombing of Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, all of the behavior of the Axis. I mean, these all come about as a result of Nuremberg and post-Nuremberg. And they're not very well understood. You are allowed, if you have a legitimate military target, to go after that target even if there is collateral damage in the laws of war. This is not well understood. Because today, it's impossible to fight any kind of war without collateral damage. It probably was always true. I think it's probably always true, but there's no doubt today. And if you insisted that the only just war would be a war where there was no collateral damage, there could be no fighting of a terror organization. They would win automatically simply by fighting in the midst of a population, which is exactly what Hamas does. So Israel was faced not with a decision between good and bad, but a decision between bad and worse. The worst was to let this stand that terror defeats democracy because of collateral damage. The bad is to go after them, even though it's going to lead to collateral damage. Was that clear? Did that make sense to people? This is very, very hard to explain to people. Because when you see horrific pictures, they are horrific. And nobody wants to see them. Nobody, including in Israel. But what was their choice? And it's not just the Israelis. It just happens that the world loves to focus on this war. What's gone on in Sudan? What's gone on in there's we could pick what's going on in Ukraine. Right? You can pick plenty of examples all over the world, and I won't right now get into the whole thing why the world likes to fixate on Israel. But it's the same problem everywhere, which is not a choice between good and bad, good and evil. It's always a choice between bad and worse. If somebody can figure out how to get this out into the public, let me know. It's just very, very hard to do. Very hard to do. Okay, I want to get through a couple of more passages. And then we'll see whatever people want to say as final comments. But do we have a fairly clear idea of the difference between peace, quote, pacification, and peace, v'tzedakah, and justice, righteousness? I think that this is a crucial thing. If you walk away with that, I'm going to consider this a hugely successful session.
Yeah, so how, when they were arguing the Midrash, going back and forth on that, they had to come to the conclusion that God then is not omnipotent.
No, they didn't.
I'm sorry?
No, they didn't.
Well, because there had to be an argument.
No, you're looking for consistency.
Okay,
There is no
so
consistency.
that's a good way of putting it.
There is no
Yeah.
consistency. That's the hobgoblin of smoke.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. There's no consistency.
There is no consistency
Yeah.
because each midrash, the very next midrash can say the opposite thing.
Okay, right.
Because I'm curating what midrash we're looking at. You should understand this. What Daniel did, what I'm doing in his name is he's curated passages to try to make a point. There's millions of other passages which we could curate, which would make other points. That's what makes it, if you can't tell, I get very enthusiastic about teaching the tradition. It's because it never gets old and I never run out of material. That's how rich this material is. That's how rich is in our tradition. But what amazes me was that they didn't just have Moses defy God. It's an act of justice. It's an act of justice. What she's saying, I think Moses is saying, what's good enough for the cousins is good enough for these people too. They're people. They're our family, distant family. They're not, but people. We should behave. That's the justice. That we're all created b'tselem Elohim. That we're all created in the image of God. It's just so easy to talk about and so hard to live. So hard to live. To say everybody is B'Tselem Elohim, including the person on the street. It's really, really hard. And we are kidding ourselves if we say anything other than this. And we should understand how hard it is to live up to ideals. It's hard for everybody to live up to their ideals. Here's the move I want to make. It's hard for countries to live up to their ideals. We're citizens of two. It's hard for both of them to live up to their ideals for different reasons in each place. But that's the time we're living in, where we're fighting over those ideals. Which ideals do we want to live up to? That's what's really going on in this country. That, in my view, that's what's really going on in Israel. That's why it's a pretty fierce fight. And that's why what I said at the Brotherhood Brunch, which is we are not allowed to despair and to leave the playing field. Because if we despair, we are leaving the playing field to them, the ones who do not share our ideas. We have to be more tenacious than that. I can't tell you I was thrilled about last Saturday. Now, obviously I'm revealing my politics, but the demonstrations across this country, if it's right that there were really 7 million people out demonstrating, that's a first in my experience, going all the way back to Vietnam. That's a first, that people are starting to understand that we have to stand up for our ideals, and we know we will fall short in terms of achieving them.
And they were all paid protesters by George Soros.
Yeah, absolutely. George Soros. Absolutely. And what George didn't pay for, the Israeli government did. Anyway, I want to look at one more thing. Do we have patience for one more thing here? All right. So if you look on page 9, what it says is for utopian peace. What is utopian peace? Yes, it is impossible. That's one way to translate the word utopia. And so if you translate the word utopia as perfection or the absolute fulfillment of our ideals and creating something that is truly impossible, you might conclude that it's a bad idea to even talk about it. Because all it does is make you frustrated. All it does is show you where you're falling short. All it does is lead to despair. I'd like to argue a little differently, which is we don't know what our ideals are until we express them. That doesn't mean we're going to achieve them. We know how difficult this is, and that the journey, remember what I was saying about the Torah cycle, the journey never ends, moving towards the achievement of our ideals. But we don't know where we are if we don't articulate what those ideals are. And talking about utopian peace is a way of articulating your ideals. Does that make sense at all? I never know for sure if something that seems to make sense to me will make sense to anybody else when I say it out loud.
Well, the High Holy Day sermon from Rabbi has the quote, expressing your ideas, don't despair.
So I think all of us were saying more or less the same thing wherever we were in our own way. So there is text about utopian peace. What are our ideals? What are we, the way Daniel puts it, what do we want? In the depths of our hearts and soul, what do we want? What do we want to happen if we had our, as Dr. Seuss said, if I ran the zoo, or if I ran the circus, what would we do? Okay, so we're gonna look at this. Even though there's a bunch of passages here, I want to look at 2 passages. I think we'll look at both of the Isaiah passages. Well, first, Isaiah 13, that's number 12. On your own, you can read some of these others if you want to take them home. So what does Isaiah say? Can't read my own notes. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, proud splendor of the Chaldeans, shall become like Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the end of days, what Isaiah is saying. Overturned by God. Nevermore shall it be settled nor dwelt in through all the ages. No Arab shall pitch his tent there. No shepherds shall make flocks lie down there. But beasts shall lie down there, and the houses be filled with owls. There shall ostriches make their home, and there shall satyrs dance, and jackals shall abide in its castles, and dragons in its palaces of pleasure. Her hour is close at hand, her days will not be long. Can you get a little, but God will pardon Jacob, who will again choose Israel and will settle them on their own soil, and strangers shall join them and shall cleave to the house of Jacob. For people shall take them and bring them to their homeland, and the house of Israel shall possess them as slaves and handmaids on God's soil. They shall be captors of their captors, masters of their taskmaster. What is this utopia?
We're in charge.
What's going to happen to our enemies?
Retribution.
Who's our enemy? Babylon, right? What's going to happen to Babylon? It's going to be a wasteland. Owls are going to live in their houses. What was the other thing? Jackals, ostriches in their homes, right? Satyrs dancing around. Jackals in their castles, dragons in their palaces. What does that mean? This is all Isaiah's kind of big vision kind of language, as there'll be nothing left of Babylon. Utterly destroyed. Except there'll be some people that we'll see. We're the winners. Hey, we all know somebody who likes to be on the side of winners. We're the winners, and so they're going to flock to us. And what is going to happen to them? They'll be possessed as slaves and handmaids on God's soil. Sure, they can be with us as slaves. How do we like this utopia? Did you know this was Isaiah? Yeah, we're fond of quoting Isaiah, right? Lo yisagoi tachat kafno, that every man will be under his vine and fig tree, and nobody will make him afraid. And each nation shall learn to study war no more, will not lift up sword against nation, right? We all know that. We got songs for it. Lo yisagoi el goi fere, right? Do you have any songs for this? All right, this is an image of utopia. I know that that sounds like a contradiction in terms. This is the kind of image that motivates a guy, I think, like Itamar Ben-Gvir. From Jewish Power. Yes, he's a messianist. There's a difference in Israel between the right, we'll say more about this in week 4, between the right and the ultra-right. Or what I might want to call, this is what Micha Goodman calls the practical right and the messianic right. Just like in the United States, by the way, it's not the same, but there's a difference here between what you could call the practical right, people on the right of center, even far right of center, but who live in this world, and the people who think that we're in the business of bringing about the end of days and the messianic times. Which is what you were talking about. That's why I said that's coming later on. But this is the kind of image of messianic times where Israel is the big winner. Questions about this? Because I want to show you the other side of it. Turn the page to page 10. Sorry. Hadavar asher chazal Yeshayahu ben Amoz al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. And the word that Isaiah the son of Amoz, not Amos, Amoz, it's a different name. He prophesies this concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days to come. The mountain of the Lord's house shall stand firm above the mountains and towers above the hill. And the nation shall gaze on it with joy. And the many people shall go and say, you should recognize this. This comes from the Torah service. We quote this in, not verbatim, but we quote this in the Torah service. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. Se'usharim, you know the song, Se'usharim, it comes up, all right, anyway. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in God's ways, that we may walk in God's paths. That's what the people say. For instruction shall come forth from Zion. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, u'devar Adonai mirushalayim. Right? We sing this all the time. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Thus he will judge among the nations and arbitrate for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never know war. This is the Isaiah we know, right?
Yeah.
By the way, this is from Isaiah 2. The other was from Isaiah 13. But that's all first Isaiah, right? There's one big scroll that almost all non-literalist scholars agree is at least two scrolls, Isaiah 1 and Isaiah 2. We don't know the name of number 2, so we just call them Isaiah 2. Some scholars think there's Isaiah 3. Isaiah 2, it sounds fancier, much more erudite, much more scholarly if you give it a Greek. So he's Deutero Isaiah. And there's also Tritio Isaiah. Some people think third Isaiah. Second Isaiah is full of comfort and comforting the Israelites after the fall of the temple and after the destruction. We read those Haftarot. We read from him almost exclusively from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. There's 7 weeks. They all come from him, all the Haftarot. First Isaiah, that's different. He's the more genuine article in terms of this is before the fall. This is when he's prophesying to the kings of Israel before the destruction of Jerusalem. And so here you see he's offering two utopias. One is we're the winners. They're all either dead or there are slaves. The other is they all see the light and they want to stand with us. There won't be any war anymore because we'll all be standing together. And where will we be standing? At God's mountain. Where's God's mountain? The Temple Mountain, Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That's God's mountain. Pretty interesting, I think. So which one do we want? If I asked out a piece of paper, pencils to everybody, and said, write down your utopian vision. Now, if you're like me, you would go, I need some help here. I need a model. Okay, so here you have your two models. Who do you pick? And if you pick Isaiah 2, which I suspect is what we pick, how do you get there? Peace with justice.
Yeah.
That's the long road. That's the long road that probably doesn't end. Because we really know that we don't get to utopia. Anybody who thinks that is probably just on the edge of becoming a messianist. And I find messianism really dangerous. Because once you think you know the utopia, and that it actually is congruent with God's idea of the utopia, you're probably willing to do anything to get there. That's when you think God is on your side. Doesn't matter what you do whatever it takes, and bad things happen almost every time that I occur. But the notion of peace through justice as opposed to peace through pacification, right? That's why, I mean, I was a kid and I was not very smart. Probably you could say that now, but definitely then. And I thought, you'll maybe remember this word, it's called Vietnamization.
Yeah.
It sounded to me like passive confusion. And that's what that program was.
Yeah.
Which is why I believe it failed.
And of course, how do you account for the conflict between these two verses ostensibly written by the same author?
All of you want to be consistent. Get over it.
Yeah, I just want to do something that,
No, I can, why is it Isaiah? I don't know, maybe he wrote one on Monday and the other on Thursday. It was, and he had some bad cream of wheat or something, and he, and I really don't.
How do we know if it's?
But in my opinion, it's an interesting question to ask the source question. How can the story of the flood say that the animals were 2 by 2, and then another chapter it says, no, the kosher animals were 7 by 7? Well, it's obvious to me those are two sources. It was obvious to everyone since Wellhausen all the way to probably before Wellhausen. If you go back to a medieval commentator named Ibn Ezra, he said things like Hamevin Yavin. The person who knows gets it. But he certainly was not going to say, oh, these are two sources, don't think this is divine. But the person who understands. And he said that. I mean, that's one of his favorite phrases, Hamevin Yavin. But that's an interesting question. And when I was in rabbinic school down the road, Allah Hashem, when I was in rabbinic school down the road, I had far too many professors that were only interested in that question because they thought that was the scholarly question. What are the sources? How do we break them down? Where did this source come from? I'm much more interested in what these sources say. Okay, so I can't explain why Isaiah says contradictory things. But from Isaiah, who we all acknowledge is an important prophet, he's called a major prophet. Is that because he's more important than the minor prophets? It means his book is a big book, and the minor prophets have a little book. So they are minor in the sense that each book is small. And he is major in the sense, like Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, right? It doesn't mean that Ursa Major is a bigger, badder bear than the other. It just means, right, that it's bigger in the sky. All right, so it's the same thing here. But we acknowledge that he's really important. And he offers us two models to help us answer for ourselves. What do I want? Really, what am I going for? What's my point on the am I willing to put myself on the line for? Okay, well, so if we looked at this, if you're with me on this, what we saw here is a kind of crass baseline. How do we get to peace through pacification? Moving to a much more meaningful but more difficult question of what is justice and peace. Plato spent much of his career trying to answer this question. The whole republic is what is justice. He comes up with some really crazy kind of thing. And then what does that lead to? Why would we do it? To get to lo yisa goy el goy cheved. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation or study war no more. And everybody will be able to sit on, think of that image. Be able to sit under your vine or your fig tree. I don't know if you know vine trees, they're pretty small. Sitting under it would be challenging. And fig trees aren't that big either, but sitting under them, nobody makes you afraid. Is anybody living right now without any fear?
No.
I said this at the Brotherhood brunch. I can't do it.
No.
Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzad. The whole world is a narrow bridge. V'ha'ikar lo lefached lo lefached klal. But the main thing is not to be afraid. That's what Nachman Bratslav said. So I agree with him. The world's a narrow bridge. It's scary. I can't not be afraid at all, but I work hard at not being paralyzed by fear. And the way not to be paralyzed is to have a utopian image and have an idea how to get to it. Okay, next week we're going to do something entirely different. We're going to talk about what is a friend and what is an associate? What is someone that you come to an agreement with for common purpose? So we're gonna look at some texts about that, which I think are also very relevant to what's going on today. Who are your friends and who are your associates? Who are your people that you have a common cause with, but you shouldn't confuse to be your friend? Okay, that's what we'll do next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I don't know.
Great.
Oh.